people tend to be really physiologically sensitive. And that often includes skin sensitivity when they're really young, like not liking the tags on the back of clothes or the lining on socks. And so there's something there. Why is this population whose parents might say, yeah, that was true for them? And then later in adolescence, they start picking and pulling. And to me, that means there's just some nervous system dysregulation from early in life. And we can sort of look into and study what that might be.
This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 334 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hope you're doing well, and I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest on this particular episode, Stacy Nakell. And Stacy is a therapist that has a pretty unique niche in that she does a lot of work with people that do hair pulling and skin picking and some of those obsessive OCD kinds of behaviors that we associate with that. And, one thing it dawns on me as I was, thinking about this intro, I hope that you're finding it helpful for me to have some clinical topics kind of interspersed with some of the business topics. If I was a little more organized, I'd probably do like a series on clinical topics and then a series on business building. So, maybe that's something to come, and just thinking about future episodes. As I've said before, I'm not a naturally organized person, so I have to kind of work at those things. But anyway, looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Stacy. We had a good time, and she's very, very delightful person, very personable, and I think you'll find all of this information very helpful. And also, before we get to my conversation with Stacy, one of the things I wanted to let you know about is that the doors for the Practice of Therapy Collaborative are opening back up. So if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative, that will take you to the landing page for the next enrollment that's going to go open here this month, in the month of June. So you'll, again, go over to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And the Practice of Therapy Collaborative is just an exclusive membership community for clinicians who want a practice that aligns with their values and financial goals in life. It's one of the things that I've learned over the years that I'm doing this is that the importance of community and having people around you where you can share ideas and learn from others. And this year, I've changed the structure of the groups that I've done, and we meet every week now. And then also, you have access to the Practice Collaborative platform on the Circle platform, where we can have conversations. We have training sessions. We have times for people to do kind of mastermind hot seats. Also, we have guests that come in and talk about different aspects of running a private practice. So I invite you to come to that and check it out. Again, practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And the doors for that are only going to be open until the first part of July. So jump on it to grab your spot and grab your seat. So be sure and check it out. And also feel free to reach out to me by email. You'll be getting more information about that as we move along here into this month. So particularly if you're on my email list. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And also, before we get to my conversation with Stacy, I'd love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft Network, along with something from our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hi, I'm Whitney Owens. If you don't know me, I am the person behind the Wise Practice podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. I am so proud to be a part of this network, along with my good friend, Gordon Brewer, who's doing such amazing work on helping people on their practice journey. If you haven't discovered the Wise Practice podcast yet, you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'd love for you to join us as we explore how to grow a faith-based practice that brings you the income you need and the lifestyle you want. Be sure to check out the podcast and other helpful information at whitneyowens.com.
Ready to upgrade your practice from a rusty bicycle to a shiny new sports car? Buckle up, because Therapy Notes is here to turbocharge your journey. It's the comprehensive practice management system you've been craving, equipped with everything you need to navigate patient records, schedule seamlessly, host remote sessions, craft detailed notes, and tackle insurance billing with ease. And guess what? It's your trusty sidekick, available whenever and wherever duty calls. Picture having more quality time with your clients, all thanks to this digital assistant that never clocks out. Here's the kicker. It's Gordon approved, so you can trust it's the real deal. Bid farewell to paperwork headaches and embrace a new era of efficiency and top-tier care. Ready to level up your private practice game? Swing by practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes and punch in promo code GORDON for 2 months on the house. Enjoy the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so glad for you to get to know Stacy Nakell. So welcome, Stacy. Glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Gordon.
Yes. And so Stacy is in Texas, and we chatted a little bit. We got North Carolina roots in common, so that was fun to find out. But Stacy, as I start with everyone, tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Sure. Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been in practice for a little over 20 years. And I came to my expertise in working with hair pulling and skin picking a little bit roundabout. I had a client when I was just starting practice who asked me for help with her hair pulling. And I really hadn't heard of it beyond maybe a mention in a diagnosis class. So I had to look into it. And I was just very intrigued by what I found in a couple of ways. I started to understand that it intersected with my own body-focused behavior, which was skin picking. And skin picking has become more a part of the research and the clinical understanding. So I was sort of drawn to something that I didn't realize also had a close connection to my own process. And actually working on writing my book was part of what really brought me into a better relationship with my own skin picking. And so it all kind of came full circle.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how a lot of us get into our different niches and different therapy things based on our own experience and our own kind of struggles and that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. I think that idea of the wounded healer is very, very
yes. That is a good analogy. So, yeah. So in your practice, tell us a little bit about your practice and how you've got it structured and all of that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I work with teens and adults. Most people do come to me for my expertise, but I do work with other presenting issues. And of course, hair pulling and skin picking, like so many behaviors, are really found comorbid with a lot of other conditions. So no matter what someone comes to me for, we're always kind of going to the roots and trying to understand how did you come to pick up this particular behavior as a coping mechanism, and what needs is it serving? And then are there other ways that we can meet those needs? So some of those needs are related to usually the comorbid depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder and things we have to navigate through the therapy. So I do with individuals and group therapy is my love. And so
Oh,
I focus in a lot. I'm on the faculty of the American Group Psychotherapy Association and just love group work with this population.
right, right. Yeah. So are you in solo practice or you have a group or how are you set up?
Yeah, I'm in solo practice, but I office with two other women, and we really it's a great balance of being my own boss, but also getting that connection and collegiality that I think a lot of people in solo practice really miss.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, I think that's always important to have people around that you can bounce things off of and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. So, let's dive into this whole thing with the hair pulling and skin picking and yeah, and just yeah, to, I always think of it from a clinical standpoint, and I might be wrong about this, but I kind of equate it or link it to kind of an OCD kind of behavior.
Yeah, so it is in the most recent DSM, it is linked under the umbrella of OCD and related behaviors. And there is some advocacy for body focused behaviors to be their own category diagnostically, because they do have some things more in common with themselves, although there is some overlap with OCD, particularly in sort of a quest for perfectionism that can sometimes be what people are looking for, maybe getting their eyebrows even or their lashes looking perfect. And so that's one overlap. But unlike OCD, there's not as much of a sort of magical thinking component of if I pull this hair, something good will happen or something bad will happen. And there's really more of a kind of release and relief that motivates the behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and so in your approach, tell us a little bit about that, and also just I know you've written a book on this whole thing, and what are you finding?
Yeah. So what happened was when I did that search, that was back in I did find the Trichotillomania resource or the Trichotillomania Learning Center, which is now TLC Foundation for BFRBs. And I will recommend them as a really important resource for information and connection. They have conferences. They used to have retreats. They may well start that up again.
Mm-hmm.
I did find is they only advocated and endorsed one particular kind of treatment, which was cognitive behavioral therapy. And because that wasn't my interest, I had always been interested in psychodynamic therapy and really understood too that part of the CBT perspective that they endorse really asks that a therapist not look at the roots of a behavior. And I knew that for me, what interested me and what helped me get better was really exploring and excavating the roots of my behavior and understanding the ways that skin picking had developed as a way to cope with circumstances in my life. So I was very frustrated that there was no exploration, even sort of encouraged in any way in any of these, manualized either treatment protocols or the books I was finding. And so I guess I just realized, I realized so in 2009 is when I realized I'm going to need to write this book myself. It was not a natural fit. I don't have a PhD. I was really kind of just taking a huge leap, which took me 10 years. So it was pretty incredible that it did end up with an academic publisher wanting to publish my book. And it came
That's
out in
great.
2023. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so take us through kind of your process with clients and your approach with things.
Sure. So the book is titled, it has a really long title. It's Treatment for Body Focused Repetitive Behavior, an Integrative Psychodynamic Approach. And that integrative psychodynamic approach is really at the heart of everything I do. So the integrative piece, we're integrating number one, the body, because these are behaviors that take place on the body and skin. So we're integrating awareness of the body into therapy, as well as all of those really important treatment protocols. Like there are cognitive elements, there are behavioral elements, especially in meeting sensory needs. But the psychodynamic part means that we ground it all in the therapeutic relationship. So what I
Mm-hmm.
really have enjoyed as neurobiology has sort of gotten clearer about how we function and how we bond and attach and how we learn to regulate is that it really backs up that regulation is co-regulation. And so my sense that of frustration with sort of being given a worksheet to try to work on my relationship with my skin picking, that wasn't going to work for me. I needed actually another person in the room to help me learn to regulate by helping me metabolize my feelings. And some of these deep feelings that underlie picking and pulling, a lot of times in adolescence, these behaviors develop when there's some kind of a crisis, often a divorce. And
Mm-hmm.
so a kid kind of gets lost in that and doesn't have a way to process their feelings, that's one way that feelings kind of get stored in the body and then have to come out bit by bit. And so we really do have to go back and kind of grieve and process some of those losses that may
Mm-hmm.
have stimulated this behavior.
Right, right. What do you find that is helpful in helping clients and particularly kids access those feelings and then be able to put, labels with them and words with them and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think in some ways I found the magic sauce because we all have bodies and we
Mm-hmm.
all can start to notice what I'm feeling inside of my body. And so I don't have to have words for any of those feelings. I could just know I have a lump in my throat. And oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
when I'm using my body in treatment too, if a kid or adolescent isn't maybe able to acknowledge or know what they're feeling, I might have that lump in my throat and I might say, oh my gosh, it feels like there's something I'm not saying or needs to be said, and help people kind of get in touch with, oh, wait, yeah, there is something in my throat. What is that? And sometimes it takes us a long time to figure out what words need to be put. But in
Mm-hmm.
that way, we all have those experiences. We know when our heart is beating fast and we know
Mm-hmm.
when our stomach is turning. And so we can get to some of the feelings that we may not get to if we were just doing talk therapy.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I know in my own work that's been really helpful, particularly working with people with anxiety, getting them to recognize, question, okay, you're feeling anxious right now. Where in your body are you feeling it? And
Yeah.
what does that feel like? And so just yeah, being able to kind of focus it, kind of lean into the feeling seems to be helpful.
Yes, yes. And then, of course, you're such an important part of that because as they lean into the feeling, now they have someone to listen to it and to help
Hmm.
them manage it. And so, again, you
Yeah.
as the therapist are just such a key part.
Right, right. Yeah. So tell us, are there any sort of quote unquote success stories you could tell us about or people that stand out that you'd like to
Yeah,
share? Yeah.
definitely. Yes, because I wrote up a case study. We're looking for a home for it, but I did get permission to share and a pseudonym for this client. So Sadie came to me for really intense nail biting, picking, and she was really, really unhappy with her hands. She was getting ready to become a doctor and just realizing how much her hands are going to be part of, what people see when they meet her. She had so much shame. So the reason that I really, really like to talk about her story is that she was such a huge part of the healing process. All of it came from sort of her own creative imagination of how to meet her needs. So my job was just to help her get in touch with what needs needed to be met. So she was really easy to, this does not always happen, but when you ask, what was the moment that you really started leaning into picking and biting as a coping mechanism. And she was able to say right away that it was when her parents divorced when she was an adolescent and her mom abandoned the family. So that was
Mm.
very clear. We had grief to work on. So I work with the same
Hmm.
phase, kind of trauma informed. And so we kind of bookmark that. We have some grief to uncover and work with, but only once we feel comfortable with each other and you already trust me. So that's sort of the first phase of her treatment. But she's
Hmm.
also able to tell me, even in that first session, that the picking had gotten a lot worse since the death of her father. And that had happened 2 years before. And so again, she was
Hmm.
really sort of, it was easy to link that those things were disruptive to your attachment structure and you needed to find another way to cope. And so your hands really became your kind of best friend and enemy all at the same time as
Hmm.
them to cope. And so once we kind of got to that part where we really grieved that loss, and I feel like you need to grieve it physically. So there needs to be some release, either tears or yelling or whatever it may be. And then you can sort of work it out of the body. And we had this moment where she was really, really crying because she had realized in still having a relationship with her mother that she's sort of the mother to her mother who still has mental health issues that keep her from really showing up. And so my client said something, Sadie said something like, I realized that I think my hands were my mother when my mother couldn't be my mother. And so I
Mm.
suggested, because she's a real creative person, I suggested she do something creatively with that. And she ended
Mhm.
up painting a picture of a rocking chair that was a hand. So the hand was
Mm.
like a little baby, and the baby was also
Oh,
merging into the chair. And
wow.
we talked about that, and just how that was such a pivotal moment in building self-compassion for herself, recognizing how resilient she was, and not seeing herself as sort of this person who needed fixing with these problems she had, but really as somebody who was doing her best to cope. And that was four
Right.
months of the treatment, and she really let go of her picking, biting behavior from then on. She
Wow.
also discovered that she loved doing nail art. So then she brought in a whole nother element, which I encourage people to find ways of sort of healthy grooming to replace these over grooming behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
She would focus in on the nail art and really enjoy all the sensory pleasure of looking at her nails, painting her nails, then looking at the product, feeling it. And so she really did find a replacement. And, as we've gone along, she still sees me for maintenance treatment. And she finds that, if she doesn't have time one week to do her nail art, maybe she'll do a little bit of picking, but it never gets to a point where she feels sort of caught in this cycle of shame and picking and then shame and picking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a wonderful story. I mean, it's always very touching when people can make those connections to what they're doing and find different, really, yeah, thinking about kind of a narrative kind of way of thinking of things, just changing the narrative about what has happened, and seeing it in a
Exactly.
different way. Yeah.
Exactly, Gordon. I call it embodied narrative therapy
Yeah.
in the book because, yeah, it really is. You have to be embodied and kind of go back to those feelings in order to change the story with a trusted other.
Hmm.
And then it can be
Right.
transformative, and then that story doesn't have to hold so much power.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating things. What, with what you've learned so far, how do kind of these things develop in people? I mean, what is it? What seems to be the link with all of that? You mentioned trauma and grief and yeah.
Yeah, well, and I have hypotheses of my own that I explore a little bit in the book. There's no sort of across the board for everyone way that people develop body focused behaviors. If you think about it, again, we all have dermis, right? We all
Hmm.
we all have this thing that kind of sloughs off, and we all engage in some kind of grooming, right? So all of us might pluck a hair or two, or pick a pimple. So it's so accessible that it can start to stand in for any number of things that are feeling sort of dysregulated within us. We can
Hmm.
mediate that through picking and pulling. But what I find is there are a number of really interesting common characteristics that could use more exploration. So one is that people tend to be really physiologically sensitive. And that often includes skin sensitivity when they're really young, like not liking the tags on the back of clothes or the lining on socks. And so there's
Hmm.
something there. Why is this population whose parents might say, yeah, that was true for them? And then later in adolescence, they start picking and pulling. And to me, that means there's just some nervous system dysregulation from early in life. And we
Hmm.
could sort of look into and study what that might be. And there's certainly a genetic piece that they are also looking into. It looks like maybe there's some kind of mutation on the same gene that's implicated in Tourette's. So they're looking into that. But my sense is that it's already harder to calm this child's nervous system. And so, especially if parents are stressed, then this child becomes a harder child to soothe. And maybe there's a stress in the family around that. And that somehow this child isn't getting a sense of that deep awareness that not only am I okay, everything's going to be okay, but also all my feelings are okay. Because it may be that this kid's feelings are just too much for the family. And so, for whatever reason, this kid learns to sort of tuck a lot of those feelings away. So,
Yeah.
the big one is anger. And there was a study in 2016, Curley et al., looking at internalized anger as a major trigger for picking and pulling. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you look at that, you also can connect it with some of the other characteristics like perfectionism and overachieving. So these are really high functioning people. And that's a lot of why their needs don't get tended to. A lot of my clients are actually the sibling of a high needs child. And so they learned this child needs a lot of the attention. So I'm going to just make mom and dad happy, get straight A's, be the head of the president of my class, all these things. But
Mm-hmm.
in that, you don't get noticed that you also have struggles and you also
Mm-hmm.
have pain. And so a lot of times that's the work that I do with families. If I have a teenager and the teenager being able to say, yeah, I haven't been okay. And the parent being able to usually want to hold that kid while that kid cries and gets some of those needs tended to that they've been pushing down. So that's a big part of what I notice. And then the perfectionism really can play into picking and pulling because as I mentioned, it's like you're never going to look perfect. And so if you're looking really
Mm-hmm.
in the mirror and you're going to find the
Mm-hmm.
imperfections, and if you're trying to be perfect, that's going to be a real recipe for doing some of that damage while you're in the mirror.
Right, right. Yeah. It's one of the things that I heard when you were talking about high achievers. I think it was a book I was reading here recently, but there seems to be a correlation between higher suicide rates among high achieving children than those that don't seem to fit that demographic.
Wow, I hadn't heard that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
There's a
I
lot
mean,
under
it's
the
kind of
surface.
like they achieve, once they achieve everything and then they feel like, then there's really still no sense of happiness or whatever with those things. So that was kind of the line of thinking. I don't know if there's any data to back that up, but it makes sense when you
It
think
does
about
make
it that way.
does make
Yeah.
sense. It sort of reflects, I think, when adults come to me, what they're struggling with, because usually they've been struggling with this since adolescence. And what they've found is that maybe they can keep up those appearances and they can get those kudos and those gold stars. But then once
Hmm.
everybody starts partnering up, the difficulty with intimacy, both sharing feelings, but also things like maybe people have been camouflaging some of the bald spots or the scars. And so if you want to be
Hmm.
truly intimate and you have to take off your wig or you have to take off your makeup, can sort of get in people's ways, and that can be a motivator to seek treatment because
Yeah.
something's missing, like you said.
Right, right. Yeah. The other thing that when you were talking about things where I could see where this could develop and maybe just to normalize a little bit is I think all of us do kind of tactile things that are self-soothing. I mean,
Yes.
it's just, like for me, I know a lot of times I'll be just rubbing my lips or something like that. I'll be watching TV and just, you know, and
Yeah.
it was called out to me and I thought, well, I no, my lips don't hurt. I'm just, just and then same thing with rubbing a leg or knee or something like that. Yeah.
So true, so true. And it is, I mean, we are sort of touching our skin as ways to regulate ourselves all throughout the day, which is not a problem in any way, unless
Mm-hmm.
it becomes something that has consequences that are negative.
Right. Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
I've even been watching lately, I've noticed that like Rachel Maddow touches one nail to one cuticle in her rest time.
Interesting.
And so just seeing that on her
Yeah.
really amused me. Like everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think there's all sorts of things. I mean, I was just now become hyper aware. I've got a little place on my hand that I know that a lot of times I'm just rubbing this little place on my hand. It's kind of I don't know, it's a little callus or little cyst or something underneath the skin that's always been there. It's nothing wrong. I've had doctors check it and nothing wrong with it, but it's just, that
There's just
that
something
sort of
about
thing.
Yeah, touch
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of gives you something. You can't quite put your finger on
Right.
it. Feels
Right.
good. It soothes
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's
It's interesting stuff. Yeah.
huh.
So, well, let's see, Stacy, I've got to be respectful of your time. This is fascinating stuff. What are there any kind of parting thoughts you've got around all of this and just thinking about how we can maybe be more informed just as clinicians and people helping people?
Sure. Well, I guess I would say part of what I advocate for is that I do really advocate for a trauma-informed perspective because traditionally sort of there's been a denial that trauma could be a precipitating factor. And that's sort of the official stance of the TLC Foundation for BFRBs is that trauma does not seem to be a factor. Even so, a lot of evidence has shown more of a connection than they might like to acknowledge. And so just really actually for anybody working with any behavior to remember that a trauma-informed way of treatment is that you never discount the possibility that trauma could be a factor in a problematic behavior because
Hmm.
behaviors are symptoms of something. And so if we treat them as the problem, we might be missing the point and we might actually be doing more harm, especially to someone who's a perfectionist who might try
Hmm.
really, really hard to be perfect and not pick or pull, which sometimes happens in the research with cognitive behavioral therapy.
Hmm.
Great. And they succeed and they get that A and then they leave and they have a relapse. And it's
Hmm.
so overwhelming how quickly all that progress can just be wiped out. That would be one note. And the other note that I would like to just leave people with is that my goal is for as many people to get a little bit more of an awareness of how to work in this depth-oriented way with this population. And so the book that I wrote has really an outline in the first half of the book on how I understand the behaviors, but the whole second half of the book is how to apply these ways of uncovering and moving through feelings within that three-part, the safety phase, the exploration and skill building, and then termination or maintenance. And so I really encourage people to actually read the book, and there's an appendix that has, and I tried to make it really accessible. I also offer training groups. My goal is really just to spread the word and have as many people being able to look at the roots of these behaviors. And in that way, I think really doing a much more important service than just looking at the symptoms and trying to help people get rid of them.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I could see, even though I do use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy in my own work, one of the things I have learned is that the more you think about something, the more you think about something. And so it becomes more of a challenge to kind of change things that you're thinking about and, ruminating about a lot. Yeah.
Right. And really, if we're going
Right.
to think about how to shift someone's cognitive way of relating to these behaviors, I would say we want to reduce shame and bring in self-compassion. So what does it take
Mm-hmm.
to do that versus
Right.
how can I just get rid of this negative voice? Where did it come from? Why is it clinging to me? And
Uh-huh.
is there a message maybe I can get from my therapist that I can internalize since I'm not going to come up with new messages all by myself?
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, this is great stuff. Well, Stacy, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and find the book and all of that sort of thing.
Sure, you can find everything at www.stacynakell.com. And I also try to make myself available just if people have questions, therapists, parents, whatever. I'm sort of dedicated to responding to my emails. So if anyone wants to reach out in any way, I am happy to see what I can do to answer your questions.
Well, Stacy, this was great. I hope that we can cross paths again and have
Thank
more
you.
conversations. Well, a big thanks to Stacy for being on the podcast, and be sure to check out her book, Treatment for Body Focused repetitive behaviors. I think it's probably one of the only ones out there that is specifically for these different disorders and conditions that we treat. And what I really learned a lot from her, and just appreciative of her niche, and just that one of the things too is just something to remember is that what Stacy has done by focusing on a really specific niche is that she has actually filled up her practice pretty well. And that's, that old saying, the riches are in the niches. I think when people are starting out, they're afraid of, they're afraid if they don't cast a really broad net, they're not going to be able to get the clients. But once you establish yourself as an expert in a particular niche or around a particular issue, I think it just gives you much more credibility. And certainly Stacy has done that. And so be sure and check out the show notes and the show summary to find out more about the work that she's doing, and also links to where you can find her book. So be sure and check that out. And also, before we go, I'd love for you to join me or check out the Practice of Therapy Practice Collaborative. It's a mastermind group or a community that I've started this year for those folks that are really interested in getting the support and community around growing their practice, and also just learning from others. I think is a great way to get the support that you need and figure out those issues that you're working on. We've got a wonderful cohort going on right now and looking to add to it. So be sure to check that out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/practice collaborative. And that'll get you to the landing page and you can sign up and enroll. So be sure and check that out. And also big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. As I've said before, they're who I use in my practice and absolutely couldn't operate without them. So be sure and check them out. And be sure to use the promo code just Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. I'm just constantly impressed with improvements they're making to their platform, and just making something that's great even better, or even greater, however you want to put that. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes. So take care, folks. I hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. And looking forward to being with you again next week for the Practice of Therapy podcast. Take care. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.